Welcome to episode 39 of the FoodGrads Podcast, the podcast where we explore careers in the food, beverage, and agricultural industries. I'm your host, Veronica Hislop, a molecular science graduate student and career partner with FoodGrads. This week on the podcast, I interviewed Sai Vanga, protein specialist for plant protein technology at Protein Industries Canada. PIC is an industry-led, not-for-profit organization created with the goal in mind to position Canada as a global source of high-quality plant protein and plant-based co-products. The goal of the Supercluster is to challenge Canadian businesses to collaborate with other businesses and post-secondary and research institutions to create projects that have the potential to transform the food processing sector in Canada, creating jobs and stimulating local economies. On this episode, Sai talked to me about his role at PIC and their mission to invest collaboratively to accelerate innovation and the competitiveness of the Canadian plant protein sector. They are doing some really cool stuff, and it was really fun to learn about it from Sai. Sai laid the groundwork for anyone interested to learn more about the alternative protein space in Canada. I learned about the skill gap which exists in the industry and also what is being done to address it. Finally, Sai gave some great advice for graduate students and how many PhDs may have some skills that they don't even realize that they have accumulated over their degrees and how they're actually very applicable to the industry and they just need to know how to sell themselves on their resumes. So enough with that introduction, let's get on with the show. So thank you, Sai, for coming on the show today. I think that the industry that you're working on is so important right now, and everyone's talking about it. I'm happy to finally have someone come on the show who's in the niche about this, because I know some people in my lab kind of study this stuff, but I know there's so much more to that. So with that being said, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, no problem.
Why don't we get you to explain a little bit about what you do in your position?
Sure. So I currently work as a project specialist at Protein Industries Canada, and I can just give you a bit of background on what Protein Industries Canada does, and then I can just say what I specifically do in my role. Protein Industries Canada is actually a non-profit organization that is led by the industry, and our main goal is to ensure that Canada becomes and remains a global source of high quality plant proteins and plant-based products. And like it's part of the Supercluster program, but our mandate is that to ensure that the businesses in Canada benefit from what we are seeing in terms of the change that is happening around the world and the emphasis that is being placed on plant-based foods. We just want to ensure that Canada is able to benefit from that. So how we do things is certainly a bit different, and what we try and do is we fund R&D programs, but we actually challenge the Canadian businesses to collaborate, come together, set up a project. They can work among themselves. They can work with universities. We have excellent universities, excellent food science research that is happening across the country. We have other federal institutes like NRC and Agri-Food Canada. So the industries can use these resources and create projects that have the potential to transform the Canadian food sector by creating jobs, by contributing to the economy, and overall helping Canada move from a resource-rich nation that is exporting just the agriculture raw commodities to a powerhouse that is able to export ingredients, that is able to export actual finished products, whereby Canada can actually capture more of the value from our crops, from the Canadian crops. That is what we do. And we actually recently released a roadmap. And what we actually say our goal right now is to ensure that Canada is supplying 1 in 10 plant-based meals in the world by 2035.
Wow.
What that means is, we want to see the Canadian food industry, especially the plant-based industry, which includes feed, ingredients, and the food products, to grow to be about $25 billion by 2035. And we have 13 years to do that. That is what Protein Industries Canada is here to do.
Wow. There's a lot of things that I can go with in that direction, but one thing that stood out to me is just about talking about Canada becoming a leader, not only as a producer, but also, I know you didn't use the term manufacturer, but that's the one that's popping up in my mind. Could you maybe explain a little bit more, though, about what proteins we're talking about and where they're coming from, and maybe just like that agricultural side, if you could maybe bridge that a little bit more for me?
Sure, for sure. It might not be a surprise, but Canada is actually a huge exporter of agriculture products. Like we export 90% of lentils that we grow. We export a huge amount of pulses. I think with a population of 35 billion, if I'm not wrong, Canada is the fifth largest exporter of agriculture commodities in the world. That's after US, EU, Brazil, China, which all have a huge amount of population compared to what 35, 36 million that Canada has.
Wow.
But what happens is Canada's exports are the raw materials. We export the pulses, we export the lentils, not the finished products. And that is where we miss the value of the products, because certainly there is benefit, there is contribution to the economy from what we're exporting right now. But if you're able to process these in Canada, either to ingredients or to finished products, we would be able to create more jobs. We would be able to capture the value of Canadian grown agriculture commodities in Canada rather than exporting them to Asia or US or Europe, and where they're being processed outside Canada. So we don't see the benefits coming through in that way. So that is what we want to change. And that's what I mean by, kind of capturing that value that we have for our commodities by ensuring that they are processed a lot more in Canada.
Okay, that makes sense. In the set, well, it makes sense what you told me. It does not make sense in the case of why it's so strange how you, like you said, like we're producing so much of these like proteins in the sense of like lentils or pulses and that, and it's becoming such a big thing right now, and it's always been a big staple for so many diets, but yet so much of the supermarket foods are getting imported back from other places around the world. So it's weird how that ended up happening. How did that come to be? I'm not asking you personally, but I just think it's really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I think that is where I think the federal government and all of the people have realized that with the world changing and there being a focus in terms of people shifting their diets to become more flexitarians, and where they're trying to incorporate more plant-based diets, there is a lot more value that Canadians can gain through these investments. And I think that is where the federal government and most of the provinces also have realized that there is an opportunity now. It's an opportunity maybe for the next 5-10 years where we can actually become a leader in kind of being able to, export ingredients, export actually Canadian made food products to, US, to Europe, to Mexico. Yeah.
Right. So with that being said, where does your role sit with the Protein Industries Canada?
Yes, so certainly we have different types of projects, and I mean broadly within Protein Industries Canada, we divide them into two categories. One is technology projects, and the other is capacity building projects. I work within the technology projects or technology team, where basically my job is to manage these consortium projects that we have. I think right now we have about 35 technology projects, and basically these are collaborative projects that have anywhere between, like each one of them has anywhere between 2 to 5, 7 companies that come together, that are working together. And my job is to ensure that the milestones are being met, that the budgets are being spent properly, and the consortiums are working together to hit the targets. Because ultimately, when they hit the targets, when the milestones are met, that is when we see the benefits in terms of job growth and all of those things. So my job as a project manager is actually to, help these project leads from different consortiums and help these companies to ensure that they're meeting the milestones.
That is so cool. I mean, when you mentioned technology, because I was having a conversation with one of my lab mates recently, and we were talking about new technologies. And when it comes to the food industry, things take a really long time to adopt, but it feels like right now we're on the cusp of something like really exciting, especially with the application of technologies to food. So you're in the thick of it right now, which is really cool.
Yeah, for sure. And that is very interesting that you brought that up because it is true. If you look at the food industry in general, overall, you don't see a lot of change that has happened since, I don't know, like World War II, 1940s and 50s, in terms of the way we process food. I mean, there certainly are trends like, okay, there is organic trend. There is certainly, I think in the 60s and 70s, there is this packaged frozen food that has taken off in North America as more people started working. And there is certainly a trends and transformations that have happened, but in the true sense, the food we are eating or how it is processed has not changed. For example, if you take milk, milk is something that is available in all the countries. It is certainly processed, it is pasteurized, we use heat. It has not changed, but there is research that has happened that showed maybe there are other techniques that are more efficient, that take less energy. And there has been academic research that has happened, but the industry has never adopted because there's never a need, because it's economic enough that they are processing and consumers are happy, consuming the product as is. However, over the past few years, we see this fundamental shift in terms of what we say food is, especially with precision agriculture or even within just, making a meat alternative with plant-based foods. Like there is a fundamental shift in how majority of the consumers look at food. And that is where a lot of innovation is happening. And I think for the next 5, 10, I don't know, 15 years, the way we consume food would be rapidly changing, especially if consumers accept lab-grown meats and all of these. I think there would be a fundamental shift in the definition of food, and that is happening right now.
I know it's crazy to even be able to have a conversation right now that lab grown meats is not a sci-fi movie type thing, or it's just amazing. But even like what you mentioned about processing technologies, because as someone who is in the food science realm with academics, I've read some papers about suggesting this or doing that, and just never, a lot of times, just like you said, it doesn't get adopted in the industry. But I do feel like we're on the cusp of things with these new things and it's going to be exciting. It's really interesting where things are going to go.
Sure. Yeah.
I didn't ask you, how did you actually get interested in this role that you have? Or I guess the question I'm more so asking, would you be able to walk through the steps that you took in order to get to where you are today?
So I'm pretty early in my career, like to be honest, but I can certainly say how I came about, like what I'm doing right now and how I came here. So I actually did my bachelor's. So I'm originally from India. I did my bachelor's in food technology, and it's more of an engineering kind of course. And doing that, I kind of realized is something that I want to pursue, especially in food processing. So, I mean, there are limited opportunities in India for research. So I decided to move to Canada, and McGill University, that's where I went for my graduate studies. It's my dream school. So when I got the admission there, I was like, okay, I'm going to Canada, I'm going to McGill. And McGill is the only university I think I applied in Canada. So my options were Canada or US, and I did get invites from US. But as I said, McGill is my dream school. I said, okay, I'm going there. I ended up in bioresource engineering, which is more engineering focused than food science department. Had a great supervisor there, Dr. Raghavan, who has been working for 30, 40 years in the engineering and all of these things. And I did my master's and PhD there. I was working with plant proteins in the lab, and that is where I kind of looked at this industry and thought, okay, this is something that interests me, and there is a future direction and a focus like within this industry. Like I saw that, okay, maybe because when I joined PhD in 2015, that is where the transition has happened. We were early for meat alternatives, but almond milk is a huge thing. Oat milk started to take off, and people are talking about moving away from dairy or having the option of, why can't I have both? Maybe I'll have oat milk when I want oat milk. I'll have dairy when I want dairy. So that is when the conversation has started. And I thought that's an interesting field and just something that I was looking forward to. And I wanted to continue in that. So I did my PhD there. I worked on plant-based alternatives and looking at how some of the processing technologies would impact their chemistry and all of these things. After that, I ended up at Daya Foods, which is plant-based cheese manufacturers. So I worked there for 3 years in the R&D and learned a lot of things. That was my first real exposure to the North American industry or Canadian industry. And I learned a lot of different things. And from there, I realized what interests me, what I wanted to do. And when this position came up where I would be able to contribute on a larger scale, I would be able to contribute not to a single entity, but to the ecosystem. That is where my interest went. And that is what has pushed me to, yes, this is what I wanted to do with Protein Industries Canada. That's how I ended up here, because it gave me the sense that, I'm working in an organization that is trying to do something that is larger than that would benefit a single entity or a small sector. This is what we're talking about is a whole value chain and, a real potential opportunity for the country, for the Canadian economy. So that's what pushed me, and that is how I ended up here in Protein Industries Canada.
That is so nice. I mean, I think it's really amazing that you were able to find something that really aligned with your values in that, because as soon as I started doing research on the Protein Industries Canada, I was really impressed with just the mission, the goals, how it seems so like it almost really wants to bring in like the best people and people who care. And I just was really impressed by it.
Yeah, it's, Protein Industries Canada, I have been here for over 6 months. It's an amazing organization. And I think people here are united because of the cause. We have a clear goal. We have the understanding of what each of us have to do to be able to achieve those goals. And we certainly need support from the industry. We need the government support. We need provincial government support. And all of this is there. But at least individually within PIC, we know what each of us have to do to be able to say that, we actually achieved our goals that we set for ourselves.
One of the things that I was wondering is, where do you see students fitting in? Or maybe, I guess if someone, sorry, where do I want to take this question? I guess what I'm asking is, if I was a student and maybe I'm graduating and I'm interested in working in this cause, where do you see the industry needing people? Like what is the goal? I know that you're trying to make it a force to be reckoned with, basically Canada in this industry. So what type of people are you looking for to join in this mission, and where could students fit in this?
It's interesting in a sense that what we see or what we hear from the industry is that there is a lack of skilled labor. Not a recent graduate, but I'm pretty recent. I have just graduated from my PhD in 2018, just like 4 years ago. So I am pretty recent in that sense, and I know that there are a lot of students that are coming out of universities from food science programs that are skilled. But I think certainly there is a gap where, at least in my experience when I was a student, I have not seen a lot of focus on plant-based proteins or plant-based foods. And certainly, there are no courses around that. There is no emphasis around that. Even in different food science programs, I don't know, if you look at, 10, 15 food science programs that we have in Canada, across Canada from coast to coast, I don't know if you can actually, if there are at least a couple of courses out of the bigger universities where they put emphasis on plant-based foods. So I think students, they certainly know plant-based foods based on news and everything else, but the specific technical skills that are needed are not provided directly. They certainly learn in different courses. So if there is a protein course, they certainly learn about proteins, but I don't think there is a course that is out there that is concentrating on plant-based proteins. Like if there is a protein course, it's probably on protein structure, biochemistry, you're dealing with whey protein and all of these, and there is a small part, maybe 1 or 2 lectures where they talk about different plant-based proteins. But I think what that means is it's difficult for students when they come out and they apply for jobs to actually say that they have worked on plant-based foods, they have taken a course, they have worked in the lab that specifically teach them about plant-based foods, how the research has to be done, the needs of the industry, all of these things. I think that's what is missing. There is a gap there. Certainly, it's not easy to address, especially when you're talking about the whole industry. I mean, the needs for the whole industry, and the whole industry is different. Like there are precision fermentation companies, there are extrusion companies, there are ingredient manufacturers that are trying to develop new ingredients that are more functional and things like that. So certainly there are a wide range of needs, but the universities somewhere are slightly behind. I think maybe we would see a lot more in the next 5 years, but right now, from my knowledge, they are slightly behind in providing that focused skill for students, especially undergrads, in terms of what are the needs of the industry, of the plant-based industry.
Now you're making me self-conscious that I didn't take a food science program. But I find that really interesting that it isn't, with everything going on right now, it just seems like food plant-based is like everywhere right now. So I would have thought that these would have already existed. Now that I think about it, yeah, this, even though it's always been there, this trend, which I ultimately think will not be a trend, it'll just be a lifestyle change. It's just interesting if the courses aren't there, but maybe I'm thinking in Europe. I feel like in Europe they have, maybe I think there's a university in the Netherlands where I think they have one. I think they're kind of more focused on that.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point that you raised. I think you're talking about the Wageningen University in Netherlands. Yeah, so that's like a agri-food research-focused university, and I think they are, if I'm not wrong, they're the top agri-food research universities in the world, and certainly I think they already have courses there, but that is what is lacking in Canada, and it becomes difficult for students to then come out and say that they have certain skills that plant-based industries are looking for. And there are students that are able to do it, but not everybody can do that. And I think one way where students are able to gain the skills are co-ops. And certainly when I was at DEA, like we had a lot of co-ops that come out of UBC. They might not have studied specific courses on plant-based foods, but they do bring the skills. And when they work in a plant-based food company, even as a co-op, so you do basic tasks, but you look at R&D, you look at what is happening in the plant-based industry and how the research is happening. That gives you a lot of appreciation and understanding on what is going on within, making a plant-based cheese or a meat alternative. Because the primary difference, the primary difference that we see is if you talk about cheese, say dairy cheese, there is a lot of research that is already done. And certainly there is a lot more understanding of how the structure of cheese forms. So when you talk about the whey, casein, the oil that is trapped within the protein matrix. So there is a lot of research that is already done, and students, industries, they have access to this. The difficulty in plant-based industries is when we talk about, for example, when you talk about plant-based cheese, each matrix is so unique. When you make plant-based cheese out of cashew, that's different from a plant-based cheese that is made out of chickpea, which is different from a plant-based cheese that is made out of pea protein. So it becomes very, and the other point is you're building these food matrices from nothing.
Yeah.
Right? Like you have milk that is fermented, you're getting the cheese. But if you're talking about a meat alternative or a dairy alternative, you are building this matrix from nothing because you're saying, okay, I'm going to take this protein, I'm going to take this fat, but you certainly don't know how they are going to work together unless you actually do the work. There is no background course that you can take. There is no background research that you can do.
Okay.
It probably would change with a lot more research that is currently happening in the plant-based industries, but certainly in 2018 or 2015, that didn't exist, and it won't change for another 5 years. So there is a lot more technical work that still has to be done.
That is so okay. So I'm just thinking that is such. First of all, thank you for answering my question before I even asked the question, because I was going to ask you what could a student do if they don't have that background knowledge. So co-op, check, but just the sound of being able, if you're really an inquisitive person, and from that research perspective, if you're in academia, this sounds like a really cool avenue to start exploring, because like you said, milk has been studied for years upon years, and there's a lot of milk industries and all that. And maybe it plays back to the idea of coming back to when you had mentioned about getting these businesses to work collaboratively, because it really has to be a team effort if Canada as a whole is going to push forward. It's just really cool to think about all these like exciting projects that someone could work on, and just the potential of just discovering new things. It's really cool.
Yeah, I think you certainly hit the nail on the head. So that is what we are trying to do. We are trying to bring together the industries that are working on a different aspect in the value chain. We have primary producers, or we can have ingredient manufacturers, we can have CPG companies that are doing product development. We will have universities in some projects where professors or researchers are actually doing technical work in terms of understanding the matrix, how are two ingredients working together. So when industries and the universities develop the understanding of how certain ingredients are working in a project, that is where everybody involved in the project actually benefits, because everybody now understands, okay, what is happening when I'm mixing this fat with this pea protein and I'm trying to create this product that I want to simulate bacon, or I want to simulate a sausage. So everybody understands the baseline food matrix, the functionality, the physics, and all of those aspects, and they can build off of that. And that is what we are trying to do, trying to have these collaborative projects and involving industry and other research agencies.
That makes sense. And it also, again, I'm jumping back here, but again, we're focusing on students, is that you mentioned that you're a little fairly new to your career. And I know from experience from talking to my colleagues, is that for many people, transitioning from PhD to industry is a difficult one, especially if you have not actually worked in the industry. And I wanted to know, did you have any difficulties with your transition, or do you have any advice or something that you wish you would have done looking back on it now?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, like when you're doing PhD, you think you would remain in academia. In my case, I thought so, but I mean, I think when I completed my PhD, I was 26, 27 years old, and certainly I thought, maybe I should get a bit more experience, different types of experience, or make a decision that I want to be in academia. And that's certainly what I did in my case. That's why I started looking for jobs outside academia. But I think what I see is during PhD, certainly everybody develops a lot of skills. But where PhD students, I think, fail in most cases is in actually advertising those skills to potential employers. We talk about critical thinking, communication skills, presentation skills, and analyzing complex data and making conclusions for that. Like all of these things are very important skills that industry needs. But I think somewhere, and these skills, when a student goes through a PhD, like they certainly develop these skills, but when they want to move into an industry, I think when they are presenting their resume, when they're talking to potential employers, they somewhere don't advertise these skills. Or I think that is where the missing link is, and that needs to change. I think from my understanding, at least my experience at McGill, like certainly, the career center at McGill, I forget their abbreviation, but they do a good job in coaching PhD graduates in terms of how they can present themselves and how they can actually talk about their skills. But I don't know what is the situation at the universities, and it also depends on the student, because they need to be proactive in kind of reaching out and saying they have the skills that are posted and that are needed for this specific role. So I think certainly PhD students develop these skills, but the link that is missing is how they present themselves and how they approach and advertise their skills. Because ultimately, when you are looking for a job, you are selling. You are selling your skills, you are selling your time and your expertise. So
Yeah, that's for sure. And I think that as like doing PhD, you get, depending on the style that you do, but definitely for research, you can get really like you forget how much you might, like at my school where we present so often that I thought, I don't know if Ryerson is more like crazy about that than other schools, but Ryerson itself, I really like applaud my program because they really remind you like to practice your skills and really promote outside opportunities that you can do that. And I guess it really just speaks to, it might be important that, take some time to go to your career center early, not near the end of your degree, but maybe, halfway, and then they can help identify some of those skills. Because I think as well that when you are in academia for long enough, you start to be around a lot of similar people, just because everyone else is doing a master's or PhD, that you kind of forget that there's people that are not, do not have that same skill set, and you forget. And then as soon as you go to that job world, you just don't even think of what skills you could apply. It's all about like the date, like, I don't know, like HPLC or stuff like that, like those types of skills, which although can be useful, you have had that experience, doing presentations, you defended your thesis. Like that's not an easy thing to do.
yeah, exactly. Those are the skills that probably the industry needs rather than HPLC, because HPLC or something else, that is something that is trainable. Like you can train the person who comes in to learn about HPLC, but it would be very difficult in industry to train somebody on communicating or presenting or actually analyzing data and being able to talk about that concisely in a convincing way when you're presenting your research plan to the senior management, or things like that. So those are the difficult skills that you can certainly develop in PhD. But technical skills, I think, in most situations, people can, or the industries can train them, like once you join them. And I think majority of the industries understand that. I've certainly met managers and people who don't really want PhD people. I think that is there. It's their preference ultimately who they want to hire in their teams and their industry. But I think PhDs, they need to understand that there are a lot more skills that they have developed, and they should be focusing on those when they approach the industries and when they're talking to industries in terms of job opportunities.
So when it comes to like jobs that are more in the research and development and project management, is there actually a lot of presentations and like ways to sell yourself? Now that we're talking more, the more I realize that I might not know as much about your type of role and how that actually looks like.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's not presentation in a sense where you have a PPT and you are showing that and you're presenting. There is some aspect of that, but in the sense like presenting even to your team or to the senior management on why they should be looking at your project or why should they be funding your project. So if you looked at market data, if you looked at research data, and you understood what is happening, you see a trend emerging, and you want to ensure that your company has a competitive edge, for example, 2 years down the line, and you are presenting that, it certainly is, I mean, for you have the technical skills to understand the background data, but maybe that is not relevant or needed for the senior management. They just need to understand the gist of it. They need to understand, okay, what is happening. So I meant the presentation skills in that sense, where you are responsible for gathering data, analyzing data, doing the experiments, and making logical conclusions from that, and being able to concisely present your conclusions to your team, to if somebody is reporting to you, to them, to your senior management, so that they can act on it. They can give you a budget. They can give you resources that you need to actually execute the project. So presentation in that sense is what is important. And certainly as PhDs, we do a lot of background research. We write reviews, we look at what has happened previously, and we certainly make deductions based on that. So all those things are important. And I mean presentation in that sense.
Okay, that makes more sense. My mind's racing too, because now I'm going, wow, as we talk, I'm realizing I have a skill that I didn't even realize I have, because I'm thinking to as part of my program, I have to meet with my supervisory committee. So in addition to my supervisor, I have two other members that I have to present my research to once every few terms, just to show I'm actually doing stuff, and they can start to pick at me to ask, like, how is this going? Or did you think of this? And I've been doing that throughout my program. And now I'm thinking that's not something I actually did through my undergraduate. So that's actually a genuine skill that I've gotten used to, being able to talk at that setting with the team.
Exactly. So now imagine yourself, you are an R&D manager in a company, you have your team of 3 people, and you're presenting to your director or VP about a research idea that you want your team to work on for the next 2 years. And you're trying to convince them for maybe additional people, the budget, the time, and the resources that you need to actually execute the project. It's the same thing, but in a different setting. It's an industry and you're asking for resources for you and your team to work on. But you're basically convincing them to believe in your project based on your background research, you analyzing your data and your experiments and all of that.
Huh. Okay, I'm feeling good now. I feel a little bit that makes me think like, wow, and that's something from this conversation I never would have thought of, because that's also a skill in itself that even I'm working on, is that project development. Going in if you go to an undergraduate degree or a college degree, the university pretty much sets it out for you. Of course, there's some availability in terms of switching out this course for that course, but it's very set.
Yeah.
I just wrote my thesis proposal, and I just came up with what I think would be viable for this amount of time. And I was like, I've never done something like this before. And I guess that's not a skill, again, that people maybe in the business world, I think that's more, but if you're in that sciences undergraduates, you just don't get as much.
For sure, yeah. I think it's more of a skill that most of the people develop if they do masters and PhD. And I think that is where the difference is. Like, if you can do your undergrad, join an industry, and certainly you develop those skills as you gain more experience. Or if you're in grad school, you gain the skills through your own projects, your thesis project and things like that. So ultimately you're able to gain the skills, but in an industry, it's apparent, oh, this is the skill I'm getting. I'm becoming a supervisor, I'm becoming a manager. But in the masters, we don't, or in PhD, we don't see it that way. And that is what has to change for PhDs or master students to be able to advertise their skills, these skills to the industry.
Okay. Yeah, because honestly, making a project to plan for 2 years, it's not easy. Like, I struggled because I'm like, is this too much work? Is this not enough work? Going through the rhetoric of, okay, realistically, you figure it out over time, but it's definitely a skill. Yeah.
For sure. And I really appreciate the students that are working on the PhD or masters during the pandemic, because I mean, kudos to you and the rest of the people out there. Like, it's a struggle for us when we're able to go to the lab and do things. And I mean, now it's just even more difficult. So yeah, so I really the effort that it takes. So yeah, I kudos to you, to everybody out there.
I appreciate that. And yes, to everyone listening, because, I was in my second year and that's when everything happened. And I've come to the realization that I think I've been more in my degree with the pandemic than I have without it, going from no lab access period for like 3 months to being only half time to being we just only this week have full access. So I forget that this isn't a normal thing, so to say, like because I've done it. This is the only thing I personally know. So it seems like it's normal, even though I obviously know it's not. But
Yeah.
anyways, but I wanted to divert the conversation quickly because one of the things that, talking about location is that the protein industries, my impression is that it only, at least for getting these types of jobs, that they would only be in the prairies, in those type of areas. Is that where the majority of these roles are currently, or is there potential to be positioned throughout Canada if you wanted to work in this industry?
That's a very good question, certainly, and probably you understand that Canada, the climate, the land that we have, the resources that we have they vary differently from coast to coast. And certainly what you said is a lot of agriculture, especially the crops that we focus on, like lentils and pea and all of these things are grown a lot in prairies. So certainly there are a lot more jobs in primary production, in ingredient manufacturing, in all of these things in the prairies. But what happens after that is the ingredients are transformed into finished products. There are a lot more of these in BC, Ontario, Quebec. Certainly in Atlantic, there is a huge fish-based industry, and they have, and that's again in the coastal part. But certainly what you said is right in terms of having a wide range of industries that are spread across Canada. So the prairies, yes, most of the primary manufactured ingredients happen in the prairies, some in Ontario. The CPTs, or the finished manufacturing goods, are mostly situated, not all of them, mostly situated in the BC, Ontario, Quebec. And then you have, coastal-based industry and some fruits and everything in the Atlantic region. So it is varied, but again, based on what you want to do. Do you want to be in ingredient manufacturing? Do you want to be in product development, finished goods manufacturing? You can find jobs across Canada. It just depends on what you want to do and where you want to be.
My head was focused on a lot of the primary production is in the prairies, but that doesn't mean that they can't be shipped out or like ingredient transport over to Ontario, and you can still work there and do the research there. It's just there's options pretty much across Canada right now, and we need more people getting encouraged to go into the industry.
Yeah, ultimately that's the goal. There are a lot more opportunities now, and especially if we are able to capitalize on this trend of having more plant-based foods, we certainly would have a lot more opportunities in the next few years. And the hope is that students come out with the skills and they remain in Canada, and they can work from coast to coast anywhere they want, and they use their skills to develop new products and help Canada as a whole.
So with that being said, what advice would you give to students who are interested in going into these industries?
I think the main thing for students right now is they need to be prepared to adopt, because as I said, there has not been such a drastic transformation in the agri-food industry over the past, I don't know, 60, 70 years since World War II. And this drastic transformation is going to last for another 10, 15 years. So there will be a lot more opportunities, but there is also a need for the new graduates and students who or employees who are working within the food industry, for them to develop the ability to adopt. They need to be open to new technologies and new opportunities, and being able to adapt and learn new skills to kind of grow into these more technical or specialized roles as they come up. I think that is what the main thing for the students who are entering the food industry should have. Like, they should be more nimble, and they should continue to learn. The other thing is they can build on and do all of these things if their basics are strong. if they get the proper basics and understanding of food or the chemistry, the whatever it is, like whatever their focus is, their basics have to be right. And then once they look at the industry and how it is going in whatever direction, they'll be able to adapt. So I think that is the main thing, because what we expect is the next 10, 15 years are crucial, and there would be a rapid transformation in how we eat, what we call food, what technologies are we actually using. So
That's great advice. And that just gets me really excited for the next few years or the next 10 years. I don't know, but I'm just really excited to see all the things that not only just from a consumer point of view, but also just being a part of that knowledge and just seeing where we can take things, because I think it's Canada's time to be an agricultural leader, not just producing it, but also being a manufacturer and maybe having more of a defined Canadian type industry, because we associate so many foods around the world. But I feel like Canada's lacking unless you live here and you know the little regions, but maybe this is our time to shine. So that's some great advice. And staying adaptable, I think students will know, especially if we transition over the next 10 years, being in the pandemic, going through school during this portion, if they can make it through that, adapt to that, then just keep going, because you can do it.
yeah, exactly. And now that's a skill that they have developed. They withered through, they worked through, they achieved their goals in spite of, a global pandemic. So that is something that, they should talk about. They should talk about the skill and the energy that it actually took for them to be able to do things in spite of the things that are happening around them. I think that's something that students now have. I mean, I don't want to call that an advantage, but certainly it helped them in solving and working through the adversity. So yeah.
Mhm. Well, it's the best way to look at it. You can look at it in a difficult way, and I know that it's affected a lot of people, but if you can make it a benefit and maybe use it to show strength that you've persevered and you've adapted, then maybe it can really push you forward. So I'm going to leave it at that, because I really liked that little sentiment that you said, as well as your advice. And we're near the end of our time. So once again, Sai, thanks for coming on the show. This has really got me excited about food, where it's to come. You've also given me some things to think about that I am now going to put on my resume for when I graduate, and going to tell some of my lab mates, because I've been talking about, or I was talking to them that I was planning on talking to you. So I'm going to make sure to share that knowledge with them.
For sure.
Mhm.
I mean, if somebody out there is hearing and is able to take away one or two things, I'm a happy man that I, helped at least couple of people. So if it's more, it's great. But if I help one other person with this 1 hour of conversation, I'm happy. Thank you so much, Veronica. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. So thank you.
That was episode 39 of the FoodGrads podcast. All the notes to this podcast can be found on the FoodGrads blog or by clicking on the Student and Grads tab on the homepage. There, you can find any notes to past or future episodes. Do you know anyone you would like me to interview on the show? Perhaps yourself? Or a specific career path you would like me to explore? Then reach out and let me know. You can email me at veronica@foodgrads.com or any of the FoodGrads social media channels. Hope to hear from you. Okay, so I knew that Canada was an agricultural country producing a lot of alternative proteins in the form of lentils and pulses, but I didn't realize that there was so much work still needed to be done in this sector in terms of that processing side and keeping it in Canada. So I really appreciate Sai breaking that down for me. I love PIC's mission and what they're trying to do, especially with this focus on being collaborative between the businesses, which in the end helps all Canadians. With the shifting landscape of the food industry now, it's a really exciting time to be entering it in terms of technology, what's being done. There's just so many exciting things. So if you want to be a part of this movement, then I do encourage you to check out PIC and their website and all the amazing things that they are doing. I could imagine if you have a passion for the industry, there is a space in this sector for you. Anyways, that's it for this week's episode. Thank you everyone so much for listening, and I will see you next time.